serve as the accessibility manager. And so really what that involves is helping make web accessibility really important within the organization. And recently we hired a web accessibility lead that helps our different product teams on a day-to-day basis. I live in Ann Arbor, Michigan, so a little bit further away from Denver. The time zone thing was a little tricky, but we got there. And then my show and tell is I really like seeing how everybody plans their weeks. So this is what my week is looking like right now. And that's it. How about over to you, Soren?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Soren. I live outside of the New York City area, and I have a accessibility team management certificate. I have worked with several fintech companies and software as a service companies to create their accessibility programs. I most recently was at Envision, and I was serving as a design advocate to build a design community there and to be a resource to the enterprise clients that Envision had. So I actually have a cool artifact. This is a fox that I was given when I picked my chosen name, because my middle name is Fox, and I keep my favorite pens in here. They don't bleed through, so I can always read my notes, because I have a little bit of trouble reading, and the color coding helps. So I'll kick it over to you, Crystal.
Hey, thank you. I am Crystal Preston Watson. I am a quality engineer at Salesforce.org. And Salesforce.org is kind of the business unit for Salesforce.com that works with nonprofit, education, and philanthropic organizations. And right now I am the main support and tester for our nonprofit cloud. So every day I'm supporting the engineers, project managers, and also testers into bringing accessibility to our platforms. And my thing just fell off the desk, so I'm gonna go slightly off camera. And this is my thingy. It's the it's fine dog plushie. I got this before 2020, and so I didn't know how much I would need it. So this sits on my desk every day to remind me this is fine.
This is fine. Everything is fine. I love that. What a great show and tell. Awesome. So our first question here is, how do you define accessibility? I know depending on where you look and who you ask, there's a plethora of different definitions for what accessibility is. So let's get a couple opinions from our panelists on how you specifically define accessibility. Who wants to jump in? Maybe Soren, Crystal?
Sure, I would be happy to. So a lot of people revert to the, kind of standard, perceivable, robust, operable, but I have become a little bit more wide in my definition lately. I think it's kind of odd that we put a really hard line in between what we consider to be just like kind of something that's societally normal, like wearing glasses, versus something that's a disability and requires assistive tech, where we kind of segregate that person, like people that use a cane for eyesight. So these like different access concerns that people have exist on a spectrum. So I would say that I have been looking at accessibility as more like enablement and access than just purely physical or digital assistive tech. It's more like making sure that everyone is included and has access.
I love that. Everybody has access. That's huge. That's generally my favorite definition. Does anyone want to add? Florence, I see you unmuted.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I really agree with that. And like something that I've been trying to think a lot more of is like, not only is it like for me, because we're like a web product, we think about it from the web, but then I think part of accessibility is like, what are people's internet access? What are people's reading abilities? Where are they from? Is English their second language? How, like, what's the reading level of the site? Like all of those types of things, I think, is part of accessibility, in the sense of like, not only is it, can you use a screen reader to read the thing, but like, can like people with differing abilities from a wide variety of definitions be able to use something, right? So I really agree with Soren and their definition of like figuring out how to expand that and think about it more holistically. And it's not just the like 4 sections of like the WCAG guidelines.
Yeah, I definitely agree with both. Like accessibility goes beyond, even though we're all in like tech, it goes beyond just tech. Something I like to say, and I don't know who really kind of brought it about, but accessibility is a human right, and that everyone should be able to access the things that they need to make it in this world. And so, and yeah, when we might break it down to like, I might be working on a product, but what happens to get, there is so much more than like, well, can they access our particular site? Like, well, what happens before that? Yeah, like how is their internet set up? Well, what kind of, there, are we happy pathing it because everyone's not working on a 2020, MacBook or a 2020, HP, and and then it's, it comes to like, well, do they have access to shelter? There's so much more, web accessibility, digital accessibility. It's much more than hardware and software and applications.
Absolutely. So much of that already included answers to the next question, but I do want to ask it too. Why does accessibility work matter so much? And Jill, specifically want to hear from you on this one, specifically because you pitched this session for Denver Startup Week.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, even if you just start with the fact that so much of what people need to even function today is accessible through the web. You manage your bank, some support you can't even call in anymore. You have to go and just do chat support. So making content accessible through the web so that anyone can use it is just really vital. And then I think once you kind of jump in and you start to learn about accessibility, you use a screen reader the first time and you realize, wow, there's people out here and this is how they use it. And it's like very eye-opening, because you want every user to be able to access your site. Our company works a lot with universities. So, there's a lot of students that need to know where to get to class and need to be able to use their maps or want to tour their virtual tours. And the tool just wouldn't be inclusive. It wouldn't be all encompassing if we didn't make it so every user could access it. And once again, that being multiple language, or they're using a screen reader, or they're colorblind, and they can all get that same experience and not, a degraded experience or kind of halfway. It really makes a much stronger product, and it makes a much better society when you include everyone.
Absolutely. When I just reverberate that, it makes a much better society when you include everyone. Such an important statement to make. Awesome. So what does all of your accessibility work look like? I know we have product managers here, we have some designers and a developer. So I'm assuming the work looks fairly different between those practices. As a designer, I know what one of those looks like. So maybe Crystal, do you want to start us off with what your work as a developer looks like for accessibility?
Actually, I'm not a developer, I'm a
QA.
quality
QA,
yeah. Though I have done some accessibility development in the past, right now, my work looks like a lot of support of various roles, and that it does tend to be a little bit more technical, and that is, you know, actually helping developers and designers kind of figure out like accessibility criteria and how to go about maybe actually building things that are accessible. It's also doing testing, but it's also education, because, you know, because that's a big component of it, because I think, you know, I can't really do what I do if, you know, I'm constantly like, this is, you know, there's no kind of reference for people that I'm working with to know like, well, what is accessibility about? And so so day to day, I, you know, it's education, it's support, it's, you know, being a understanding resource for people, like, because sometimes it's hard to be like, I have no clue about accessibility. I have no clue why it's important. And being like someone that people can come to and say, hey, you know, like, teach me, you know, am I going about this wrong? How, you know, like, am I using a screen reader right? Why is the screen reader yelling at me? You know, you know, and being that kind of, you know, like being that open and comforting resource for everyone on my team.
I love that. Maybe the roles aren't so different after all. I feel that a lot in our role as well. So for design, Florence or Soren, do you want to take that?
Sure. I agree with a lot of what Crystal says. It's a lot of educating. It's a lot of like empathy building and being there with them and helping figure out how to find better solutions, et cetera. For us right now, what's been interesting is we are working on creating a new design system for Jstor. And so part of that is we're trying to figure out like, how do we make things more accessible on a component level? So we're making sure all the colors are going to have the proper color contrast. When you're using like a combo box where you can like search in a field and then have a drop down, how do we make sure that works? What are all the correct ways we can label it and make sure all the keyboard interactions are correct, et cetera, from like a very base level. So that's been something that's like been very interesting to work on from a design perspective. But for the day-to-day, a lot of it is also like working with the other designers, making sure we're thinking about not just like what we're saying, the happy path, but like what are all the different various scenarios that we might run into? What happens if someone is using their screen and they're zoomed in really closely? If you have stuff like happening over here, no one's going to know something's happened, right? Like thinking about all those different cases and really trying to be a voice for, but what about X and what about Y? Which I guess is probably not that fun sometimes as the designer receiving that. But I think part of this work is trying to help like bubble up all of these different variety of experiences that people have.
Yeah, absolutely. Soren, is there anything you want to add from the design side on that?
Yeah, I would say that systems design has been a really important part of accessibility from my point of view, because it allows us to, one, just move so much quicker, and it makes for better accessibility because you're setting this like, it's like working with a known set, right? You're creating an environment in which you can only work with parts that have already been vetted. And then you get to work really closely with developers as well. So if you're working with a design systems team and you're working with design systems developers, then you're working with people that already know a lot about components and already know a lot about semantic HTML. And it makes for a really good accessibility experience and a really close working relationship. And I feel like that makes for better experience overall, not just design, but the entire tech stack.
Yeah, I'll keep echoing the design system. Like having accessibility built in just makes everybody's life easier. And yeah, highly recommend. And Jill, how about from a product standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. I think also maybe from a small company standpoint too. So I definitely am on a smaller team. So, and also kind of started the accessibility initiative in our company. So we worked with some really a legacy platform and came back and tried to turn it to be accessible, which if you don't start with, the basics, like really nice semantic HTML and things like that, you're kind of getting creative on how you make something accessible, or restart. So from a product perspective, I'm making sure that every single product requirement has accessibility taken into account. Is color contrast? Is it tabbable? Is it screen reader support? Et cetera, et cetera. I can't tell you how many ideas our CEO or someone on the sales team comes to me. It's like, wouldn't it be cool if it would do this? And the first thing I think of is, yes, but that's not accessible. Like that's often the first thing that's out of my mouth, which is like, actually it happened today. They wanted to solve a text issue by scrolling to the right and up and down. I'm like, nope, you can't do that. You can't have a two-way scroll. So I think for me, it's, I kind of came up with the word accessibility champion because I kind of became known as the accessibility expert, and I didn't, it kind of felt imposter syndrome to me because I don't know the way you solve everything. Like I can do the research, and sometimes I need to do that because while every one of our developers knows that they may have to come in and work for accessibility, and we can reject any ticket or any enhancement if it's not meeting these accessibility guidelines, sometimes we just don't know what to do. And I might jump in and try and help and do research. But champion felt better, like a better term, because it's I'm advocating for it. That doesn't mean I always know the right answer, if that makes sense. So for me, I think being head of product and starting as a product manager, it's really being that champion for the accessibility, understanding it, learning it, and educating about it is how it kind of played in. Everything from I'm our VPAT author to I write tickets about color contrast. It's very vast in my role.
Awesome. Yeah. So other than all of us really being like this support for the teams that we work with around accessibility and being the champions, what are some tools that you've used that you would suggest to beginners getting into accessibility to help them either understand accessibility or just kind of make progress in some of the work they're doing? Let's get a tool from each of you. We'll start with Crystal.
My it's simple. Keyboard, unplug the mouse. I think a lot of that's I think a good introduction into accessibility. Just try to navigate a website just using your keyboard.
I love that one. Florence?
I was going to say a screen reader, but I was also trying to think of like something a little bit different. There's, and I was trying to look up what the name of it is. I think the one that I have is called Funkify, and it's a like disability simulator. And so what's interesting about that is like oftentimes after, like I feel like as people start to learn a little bit about accessibility, they're like, oh, does it work with a screen reader? Does it have color contrast? And it's kind of like you get this like set list of 5 things, and then everyone's like, okay, we're done. And those are the things. And what's interesting about this disability simulator is it gives you a variety of different things. Like if you have the type of vision where you can only see like a small spot on your screen, what does that look like? Or if you have tremors in your hand, what does that look like? And so what it does is you turn it on, and then you're trying to navigate the website, and then the little hand is like moving. And so you get a better sense of like, what are some of those other elements and other experiences that people may experience while they're trying to use the internet.
Yeah, I love both of those. Screen reader, everyone should try it out. And yes, I have the Funkify extension in my browser too. Soren, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to pick just one. I definitely like the add-ons, like getstark.co has a great add-on for checking your designs. There's not really a substitute for just like learning some of the things that are important to convey though. And I think one of my favorite things to have people do as an exercise to just kind of like understand cognitively the important parts of a like or something like that is to watch some Netflix shows with the audio descriptions on and the brightness turned way down on an iPad so that you can't see very well. And that kind of simulates what my vision has been like for a long time. And you kind of see the difference between good audio descriptions and really bad audio descriptions, because like the second season of Sabrina, it's every emotion is their brow was furrowed, and I just can't stand I can't stop laughing. But there's some good shows out there, and it's a really great exercise for people, because then they go, I see exactly what you mean. And people take for granted being able to sit down and just like watch any TV show that they want to. But a lot of people have to wait till it comes to Netflix, or it never gets audio descriptions. I was so excited when I found out The Good Place had audio descriptions and it wasn't on Netflix yet. So yeah, that's my contribution.
Love that. Love both Sabrina and that suggestion. Jill, how about you?
Yeah, I think for me, when I first started, I really liked Totally, which, Soren, please tell me if I'm pronouncing it wrong, because I might be. But I liked it because it could really break it down. Like, you could just look at color contrast, or you could just look at like, this is what the screen reader is going to read. And so sometimes, like when you do a big audit, like you use Axe, which has another great tool in Chrome extensions, or Site Improve or Wave, you get all these errors and you can be a little bit overwhelmed. But you can just be like, okay, what's going on with color contrast, and just look at how your page looks for that. So I really like that one.
Awesome. Super great tools that I'm trying to share. Thanks, Soren. I was just going to paste it in there. Like, I haven't heard of that one, but thought I had the right one. Yeah, so those links are there for you in the chat if you all want to check those out, add those extensions, download, whatever. All right. So the next question is, what does being an accessibility champion mean to you? And Jill kind of got into this, but I want to let you expand on that if you'd like. And then we'll hear from everyone else as well.
Yeah, sure. I've actually, this question is kind of what inspired this session. I wrote an article about it on LinkedIn, and I kind of broke down 5 things that to me make you a champion. First is believing it, recognize accessibility, believe that it's important. And then the second is learn it yourself, educate, use a screen reader, be familiar with what that user experience is like. Secondly, actually talk to end users. Unless you can, actually talk to someone who's utilizing this, you can pass all the accessibility audits left and right, but that doesn't mean that your website is actually usable for someone with disabilities, or someone with temporary need for those softwares. Third is advocate. For me as a product manager, that would look like making room in my roadmap. Every calendar year, I ensure at least one large initiative is related to accessibility, and that's just a commitment I've made to my company, and my company's made to me to help us grow. And educate others. All of my sales team members would tell you that probably about once every 6 months, they sit down and I make them all turn on their screen readers. We all have Macs, and it's built in Command F5, and they all have to try it themselves. They all, are familiar with, common words and basis of what accessibility is. And it's because it's important to us as a company. So everyone should know at least a basic amount about it. So that's what it means to me.
Awesome. I love that. And I love the idea of the accessibility champion, because I know you mentioned being labeled the expert and the imposter syndrome that comes with that. Like, that's been very real in my life as well, as like not having official accessibility training, but very much a champion for accessibility and inclusion. Soren, how about you? What does accessibility champion mean to you?
The imposter syndrome thing is real, because, I think we were that way at first about user experience, because it's like, in the time that I came up, there was no user experience program anywhere. There was a couple of HCI programs, but it was like really focused on eye tracking and that sort of thing. And you kind of get into this imposter syndrome space, but I've realized that I have this, kind of superpower with having a disability, that I'm able to offer a perspective that people often lack. One time I was working with the accessibility team at one of the companies I was consulting with, and they were just like, oh, well, nobody's going to be in this specific position where they would have to use voiceover with this design software. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Sometimes I do. Like, I am that designer. I am that person. And then you also have like PMs and UX writers that use this software, and you might have a developer that goes in there, and all of these people could have some level of vision loss of some sort. And they might use Zoom or VoiceOver. And people don't realize that if you use some of these tools, that notifications don't work the same way, and it's disruptive. And if you're zoomed in, you might not see something. And it's just it's a whole different thing. So for me, being a champion also includes kind of being the Jiminy Cricket of the team, where it's kind of like, you've got to find a way to be that conscience and to say like, hey, I want to get you excited about being an accessibility champion too, or at least an advocate, so that you aren't having to be the person that's carrying the entire weight, because no one person can carry all of accessibility. You want to be maybe like the leader out front, but you can't be the person that carries all of that weight. It's just not possible for one person. So I think it's about finding the people that are also excited, fostering that in them. And there is a lot of education involved, but it's something that I think is really rewarding. And when you see other people get excited about it, it's unlike anything else, I think.
Totally. Excitement is contagious. I also love the Jiminy Cricket comment. I usually refer to myself specifically as a squeaky wheel when it comes to accessibility. So I'm going to adopt that instead, because it's definitely better. Florence, how about you?
Yeah, I think those are great things. I agree a lot with both what Jill and Soren said about being like what it takes to be an accessibility champion and what it means. I think something that I found really important is also like figuring out and learning how to empathize with the different groups that you're talking to, and being sort of a little bit like, I guess my version is the toddler, which is like, you're very excited about something, but you're also going to just try, or like when you're talking to a toddler, like you try different versions of like, does this make sense to you? No. Does this make sense to you? No. Does this make sense to you? And so part of that being in a champion position is like figuring out, well, like, how do I convey this to people of different levels or people of different departments or skills, right? So like how you talk to a developer might be different than how you talk to the CEO of your company, but the CEO needs to understand why accessibility is important, as well as the developer to understand why accessibility is important, right? Like kind of everybody needs to know why this is a significant part of what we need to be doing. And I think part of being an accessibility champion is figuring out like, how do you talk to all these people of all these different levels and be able to convey this information to them.
Everyone's nodding. Yes. Awesome. And Crystal, how about you?
Yeah, I definitely agree with everyone. Being, an advocate, I kind of like to think of when I'm not an advocate, I'm also an instigator. When I need to be, like when I need to speak truth to power. And because some people don't get it and they don't care. And I, as my grandma used to say, that sometimes I am a crap disturber, but that is not how she said it. And so I am going to be that. And also someone was perfect. They said I was simping for accessibility, and I love it because because you can look up simping and what it means, but I'm like, yes, I'm simping for accessibility. Because I truly, as I said, accessibility is a human right, and I'm going to make sure that it, gets done. I am not a person that's like, I don't like to raise my voice. I don't, I rarely swear, but, when I'm, with this, I will get it done by advocating and education. But if I can't, then I'm going to, I will instigate until it's done. And so that's how, that's kind of my, what it means to me.
I love that so much. I think that probably resonates with all of us, as like, we're definitely instigators as well. Awesome. So I have two more questions that I want to make sure I get in before we move on to the audience Q&A. The first one are, what mistakes have you made? What do you wish you knew when you first started in the space that you know now?
I can kick us off on that one. This one's like almost embarrassing, it feels, but I was using a screen reader wrong for a good 2 years. Like, there's so many different controls when you're actually using a screen reader, and different screen readers have different ones. There's so many really great cheat sheets out there that make it so much easier. I don't know how to pronounce the name exactly right, but DQ, or they have a great one that I often use. But it's not just tabbing through the site. Like, yes, without a screen reader on, you should be able to tab through a site, but there's a lot of different controls. So if there's something I could say that very early on to educate yourself on how to adequately use the screen reader, avoid making mistakes like adding ARIA labels when they're not actually necessary and things like that, that early on in our product accessibility, we did quite a bit of, and we ended up getting an audit with Level Access, a really great company. I highly recommend if anyone does want to get audits, and they led me the right way. So it took me far too long to figure that out, despite all the reading I did about it. It doesn't feel black and white in the documentation to me. So do more than just tab.
Awesome. How about one more?
I think my biggest mistake was really looking at it from a guidelines perspective. When I first started, it was oh, we're talking about VPATs, and it means we have this set of guidelines and we have to meet them. And I think what happened was I was so set on this is wrong and this is wrong and this is wrong and we have to do this. But when you're trying to talk to a human, they're not really going to respond that well to you if you're just hi, here are the 14,000 things that we've done wrong, right? And I think for me, at the very beginning was not really understanding, it's about conveying what we're trying to accomplish and conveying how we're going to get there, and helping with figuring out priority and helping with figuring out the whys, and then moving to the hows, instead of just straight on being hello, good day, welcome to this meeting, please fix these 40 things. Because when you do that, people are not very responsive. But when you're well, the reason why we can't have images of text is because, a screen reader might not be able to read it, or you might have it where if you're zoomed in, you can't read what it says, or it might not be clear, or these variety of different reasons. And it's we want to fix it this way so that, etc. You get a lot better responses from people, right? And so really figuring out that piece of how are you actually communicating this? That isn't just here are the rules, here's what we need to do. And I think part of that growing experience for me is then trying to learn a little bit more about how do we talk about accessibility? What does it include? I mentioned earlier, being accessibility is not just a bunch of guidelines. It's thinking about people's different experiences through a variety of different spectrums. So that for me was one of the biggest learnings, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And Crystal, I saw you trying to pipe in earlier, so I want to make sure you get to answer this question too.
Yeah, thank you. I think for me is not being upfront about my disability early on when I started to do I was oh, okay. It's when I realized it in a weird way, even though I've been blind in my right eye for the whole, my whole life, I didn't really take it as, it was well, I have my left one, works. And so that's, but it still caused a lot of problems. And then when I first got in, I was thrown with a screen reader, and I'm whoa, this is so much, and then as my vision, I still was trying to keep it a secret, or be kind of, maybe not secret, but try to be private. And I realized how much my perspective, not that I had a bad perspective on accessibility, but once I was out in the open, and I could be in the rooms and be yes, Soren, like you said, how when you were working on the design software, it really made what I did more impactful, and it also really helped me really kind of come into my own in my work.
I absolutely love that. And that both what Florence and Crystal, you both said, really leads into this next question. And it starts to grow accessibility, right? So accessibility is a part of what we talk about when we talk about inclusive design or inclusion. So how have you, or would you broaden your work from solely just accessibility into inclusive design? And I think owning who we are and, you know, celebrating the diversity that exists within our teams as well is part of that. So thank you, Crystal, for doing that. And Soren, I know this one is very close to your heart, so I'll let you start in on this one.
Yeah, so I think that the art of disclosure of who we are and bringing our full selves to work has become more of a hot topic lately. And I think part of that has given me leeway with myself to say I'm going to be completely open with who I am and what I want to show up as, you know, whether that's at work or like who I want to show up as. And as someone who's genderqueer and who's disabled and has, you know, also had a lot of eye problems. I'm also blind in my right eye, and also I've had a lot of work done on the left. I have struggled a lot with employers, with letting them know like what's going on, and people, you know, will walk up, like they don't know from my work that I have a disability, but they'll walk up on me and I'll be like, oh no, like you scared me, and they'll be like, I was standing here for 5 minutes. So, you know, you're just like really in the zone, so I didn't want to interrupt you. And it's been really freeing to be able to say, like, I don't have anything that I would be embarrassed about, or like anything that's like, oh, I better keep this off of Twitter to really hide. And I feel like now disclosing that and using it as an asset has really become my secret weapon. And to be able to say like my lived experience and then the academic experience that I've gathered on top of that and my professional experience, all of that now works together to create this expertise that I couldn't be able to find anywhere else if I tried. But yeah, I feel like the next steps in inclusion would be more radical design. One of my favorite quotes is that it's not revolutionary or radical if it's inaccessible to the poor. I would strike to the poor and just say if it's inaccessible. If it's not inclusive and it's not accessible, then it's not radical, it's not revolutionary. I really feel like that's kind of the next step, is to consider the ecosystems that things reside inside of, and to get a little bit more mindful and emotionally intelligent about the products that we're creating and what kind of societies that they exist in.
Yeah, that is one of my favorite quotes of all times. If you have the original source, please let me know, because I can never find where it actually came from. But does anyone want to add into the inclusive part? Otherwise, we can jump into the audience Q&A, because we've run a little bit over the time I promised that we would spend on audience Q&A. All right, cool. We will start from the top then. Hank is asking, is anyone on your teams blind or visually impaired? For us at Workday, the answer is yes.
For us at Ithaca, it's no.
Also no at Concept 3D.
That would be sales designer. That would be me.
Yeah, I'm usually the one.
I can add that that is why, you know, we made an effort to reach out to companies like Level Access so that we could get that viewport that we don't have internally, where they do have people on staff that can help you with those with that actual user testing. And also working with a lot of universities, we're lucky that a lot of universities do have accessibility departments with students that utilize the tools, and we're able to utilize them as well for our testing.
I just want to, I did work on an accessibility team that majority of the people on the team were blind and visually impaired. And most of them came from BIT, Blind Institute of Technology, that's actually based here in Denver, and it does Mike Hess is the does awesome work, and so you know, yeah, I'm all about people, making sure you're hiring people with disabilities, because that's a huge issue of trying to get people with disabilities to do labor for free. And that is not great. That's all I'm going to say. I don't want to go on a rant.
Yes, 100% to that. And something from at Workday, like most of the people that are known as blind or visually impaired are on our specific accessibility team, but I do think it's highly important to make sure that we are including people with disabilities on all of our teams, not just on an accessibility team, because we need all of those perspectives across the board. And yes, absolutely pay people for their time, always, forever. Thank you, Crystal, for saying that. All right, next one. And this is to Jill specifically. How did you grow in being comfortable speaking up about accessibility things when something wasn't accessible?
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. I think for me, I was really lucky that we had clients that it was so important to that it was easy to advocate for it. Universities really advocate for accessibility, be that because they had lawsuits or because they care. I think I've seen both the spectrum, to be honest. And so it became clear pretty quickly to keep clients and to get new clients. We had to learn about this, and we had to do these things. We had to address audits. We had to do them. And so it was really nice to have that kind of behind me and advocate for it. The larger things, like advocating for it in the roadmap, came from being wanting to show that we are an inclusive company. Once I learned how important it was to our clients, and then you educate yourself and you learn how important it is to the world, it just feels like the right thing to do. And it's a hard thing for anyone to articulate against, honestly. If you really understand it and you educate, people seem to get on board. So I think that's been my best weapon, is understanding and educating others, because it's just the right thing to do, and you learn that.
Awesome, thank you. Next question is from Rachel. Do you have executive and leadership sponsorship in making your products accessible, or is it something that you've championed and gained support? I'm curious as to how you might gain support if there is resistance. Who would like to take that one on?
I can. Oh, sorry. I'll be quick. It's one of these things of, yeah, it's hard. Like, I think a lot of times most people are willing and are kind of like, when you explain to them, they do kind of get it. But there's some people you have to hit them with the bottom line. You can't sometimes get them through the heart. Sometimes you have to get them by the wallet and in the pocket. As I sometimes tell people, it's like, as my grandfather said, you don't leave money on the table, and that really does work. And so, funny enough, I'm actually doing a presentation on how to kind of do your own like pitch deck to executives, and mainly that comes through doing kind of doing a little bit of testing, auditing on your own, gathering this information and presenting it to your upper management and C-level execs in a way that speaks their language, because it's not just about like, oh well, it shouldn't be an afterthought. I can say human rights all along, and people are like, no, give me that. I want that cash that folds, and like that's what they it's like. And then it's like, hey, you're gonna probably get sued, and you're gonna have that cash that jingles, and then that's a lot of times that will kind of get it to them. It's like, oh yeah. So it's really, if you can't appeal to the heart, appeal to the wallet, and if not, appeal to like, hey, this is going to really affect the company's bottom line.
Absolutely. And I'll just add a little onto that. For what we did at Workday, myself and another one of our designers recently went full-time in inclusive design this year after 2.5 years of working on accessibility as our side project, our side hustle. So we showed the impact, we showed the need, and then we did a bunch of research and pitched this to our executives to get the resources to go full-time. So, you know, sometimes you kind of have to show the work first before you'll get people invested in your investment as well. All right, next question is from Nicole. I'd love to hear about how accessibility technology is being championed by and for older adults that have age-related usability, accessibility needs, maybe some older tech-based workers who are champions or innovators. Anyone want to take that one?
Well, I've actually done a little bit of consulting in this area recently with some projects that are studying aging and also to just in general on visual disabilities. There's some really interesting things happening because a lot of issues that we see with access of getting older have to do with compounding access problems. So you know, like not understanding how to use the technology, not having consistent access through internet, visual issues, hearing issues, and maybe also cognitive issues. So those things can be all mild, but they compound on each other. So when we start designing things that address all of these issues, rather than, like Florence said, just hitting kind of those top 5 of, okay, well, it works with screen readers, it has captions, we did alt text, what more do you want? Like once you start really designing with the intention that it is inclusive, you can start addressing some of those cases where you have someone that is aging and you can address a lot more of their access needs. It's something that I definitely think needs more testing and literature about it, because we do have a rapidly aging population and we have a really large boomer population that's starting to hit that age as well, and they're working later and later. So I think that we're going to see a shift where all of a sudden we have need, and I don't think we need to wait until that happens before we start making changes.
Absolutely. Does anyone else have anything to add? No? All right. Next question is from Anna to Crystal. What are your recommendations for ensuring that QA can easily meet accessibility compliance? Any tools or tips that you can give to make it easy to onboard a QA org to accessibility testing?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is not throwing them into accessibility testing right away. I do kind of see that, and I hear a lot of stories where, and even my first experience with accessibility testing was just signing me a ticket and saying, use NVDA. And I was like, what's NVDA? and you know, and me turning it on, and I'm like, whoa, it is loud. It is, I don't know. And I spent the majority of that ticket just learning about how to operate a screen reader. And I didn't finish the ticket because I felt I had no kind of like, I had no knowledge on how to thoroughly test this. So it really is about giving, you know, that initial education. I'm not saying you do a 12-week long, you know, boot camp, but even, you know, a day or two of like, well, this is what accessibility is. These are the types of accessibilities, and especially the type of disabilities that would, you know, most commonly affect navigating and accessing, you know, websites and applications. And then from there is, I think, like I said, having testers that they can actually navigate a keyboard, because I feel like if you can't navigate a website or application with keyboard only, it becomes, it's not easier to do a screen reader. And it becomes, but I see a lot of times where the initiative is just like, just test this on JAWS, test this on, voiceover, and let us know. And yeah, and there's a lot of like, where it's a lot of like guesswork, and it's like, well, it sounds okay, but they don't even know how these screen readers voice things. Like, what is actually, it's announcing a button as a link. It's like, that's not correct, right? But they're like, well, it told me something happened. so so it's really, the initial is getting some kind of education, and then kind of building it up. And and as you can't do this super thorough audit with testers and quality engineers who have um, no baseline for for accessibility.
Awesome, thank you. Next question is from Melissa. What are your favorite disability-focused books, podcasts, movies, and or other media for 2020? I'm going to throw in, before everyone else answers, Mismatch by Kat Holmes from an inclusive design standpoint. Absolutely fabulous. She's incredible. All right, Jill, start with you. Oh yeah, Soren's got it.
I am blanking. So someone else jump in and save me.
I've got an entire list that I'm compiling on Amazon, but I think that some of my favorite books actually don't directly have to do as much with disability as they do with bias and eliminating cognitive bias. So there's a couple, like this one is called Everyday Bias, and there's a couple more that I have that are like I can put up a list, but it's like how how good people like create bias. And Blind Spot, that's what it's called, Blind Spot. And things like that, I think, go towards helping us to reduce the thought that we're the center of the universe and that we know everything. Because I'm always kind of kicking myself for having only started doing accessibility when I became affected by it. And I look at it and I go, wow, there was so much work to be done. Why was I only starting now? I think that decentering ourselves a little bit and looking at where our biases come into our design work, even unconsciously, can be a really good way to start learning accessibility.
Right. Any other additions? We're just a couple minutes left.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll do really. I had to look up the URLs for it. One is a book, Regine Gilbert, Inclusive Design for a Digital World, Designing with Accessibility in Mind. I will drop that link into the chat. Really, really awesome. And then there's a podcast called 13 Letters, and it's about digital and web accessibility. When the co-host is Cordelia, who's also at Salesforce.com and who's really great. And I was listening to that and didn't realize and I was like, oh man, I'm now working at the same place. So I will drop that. Those are my two.
The one I was going to recommend, and I see your chat, Kelsey, just one of my coworkers. A couple of us have been reading Inclusive Components by Hayden Pickering because we're designing a design system and we're trying to make it inclusive. So that's been a really helpful book for us. It walks through really clear examples and it talks about all of the different elements and what things you need. And that's been a great baseline for us.
Awesome. Well, we are at time. I just want to say thank you to everyone who showed up for this session. Thank you everyone who contributed questions. And thank you to Jill, Florence, Soren, and Crystal for being our amazing panelists. I'm going to add one more link into the chat. It is a link tree, which has links to all of our individual links as well. So like LinkedIn, Twitter's, portfolios, stuff like that. So feel free to reach out, connect via LinkedIn or whatever else we have up there. We would, love to connect more with all of you. Thanks again for showing up, and I'll turn it back over to Denver Startup Week.
Can we leave? I don't want to not.
It was awesome being on this panel with you all.
I'll see y'all later.
Yes.
I thought somebody from Denver Startup Week was going to come back in and tie us up, but
Yeah.
That's what they said, right?
I thought I heard
so.
something about it. Sounds like I better not leave. I'm kind of famous for just being like, bye.
Yeah. And there's just the awkward silence. We're still all on video, but no one's saying anything.
All right. Well, y'all were awesome.
Yes, it was fun.
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you all.
All right. I'll see y'all